So today I'm talking fast because I got 45 minutes and I have like way more stuff than that to go. So forgive me if I ramble on. So don't take time to write down the websites and all the information I'm going to give you. I will give that to you all later. So just spend time listening rather than writing down. And you can see on your seats, this is kind of like a precursor to a workshop I'm doing tomorrow afternoon about component editing textures and components. And that could really be a 2-day class, and it's a 3-hour class tomorrow. So I just kind of want to know what you're most interested in. And so we'll have a little democracy about who gets to learn what tomorrow in class. So the question is, why, since SketchUp comes with its own great little paint bucket of tools, why do we even need to know about editing SketchUp, editing any of the materials, finding more? And the answer to that is always, I go to the lovely little tile selection that comes with SketchUp. And you know, if you're working on a project, this is like the tile that you're ripping out of a house. This is not the tile that you're speccing to put into a house. So at the end of this, I think we should all get together and petition, like SketchUp is doing all those wonderful, great things. The least they could do is put some new tile and some other new materials in their warehouse for us, especially if you're working on interiors. So, but even if they do put some more stuff in here, you know, there's 10,000 tiles out there. They can't put all of these into the warehouse. The question is, how do you modify the textures that are already in here? And if you can't make that work for you, where are other sources you can go out and find other textures to import into your models? So that's kind of the two parts of what we're going to be talking about today. So I also, I'm working on a PC, and materials is the one thing that's probably the most different on a PC and a Mac. So I apologize to the Mac people out there. I've got some screenshots to show you, and it's always kind of tricky going back and forth. You're kind of like the ugly stepchild in my class, and you're not ugly, you're beautiful, so I will try to help you out as we move along here. So just a real quick how the paint bucket tool works. I'm just going to start with some colors. And so I'm working on this house for a client. I'm going to go ahead and pick a green for one wall. And because I'm from Seattle where it's pretty gray, I'm going to go ahead and make a nice cheery orange for the rest of it. I show this to my client. They're not too excited about my design scheme I've come up with, so they want me to make everything green. So if you don't know how to go back and find the green in your warehouse, you can just use the eyedropper tool, or it's B-Alt. If you are on a Mac, you don't have an eyedropper, you have to press Command plus Alt, and you'll get that little eyedropper to pop up. So I can sample the green. You can see the green is now up in the material samples. And I can go ahead and one by one click them, or if I hold down Shift while I click one orange wall, then it's all going to turn, everything that was orange is going to turn simultaneously into another color. So if you've got, you know, a whole big conference center, you're changing the color of walls, that's like a quick trick to change a bunch of things at once. So once you have a material in your model, so there's a couple different things we can change to alter it. We can change the orientation and the scale of it, or we can change the color of it. So let's look first at just changing the scale and the orientation of it. So if I click on the texture and right-click, go to Texture, Texture Position. I've got 4 little thumbtacks that come up. The top 2 are Scale and Shear, which are pretty useless for most things unless you're, you know, putting a picture of a house on in perspective. The red one is the one that's stationary that's going to stay there. The one we're going to use the most is the green thumbtack. And I'm going to either scale and rotate the texture with that. If I move it closer to the thumbtack, farther away, that changes the scale. You can also change the orientation by moving the green thumbtack. And sometimes it gets a little wacky if you're starting out, and the rotate tool can be a little finicky. So you can also just right-click again and say rotate 90 degrees. And that might be an easier way to rotate a material. So you can also change the scale of something. I'm going to go to this checkerboard material. And if I go to the edit, it tells me down here that it's 1 foot for those 2 squares. So each square is 6 inches. So I can change the whole scale down here by changing this to 2 feet. And that means each checkerboard is now 1 foot across. I can also break this link, because if I change the horizontal, the vertical changed there. If I break the link and it's broken and type in 1 foot now, or that's 1 inch, so that I can change the orientation one direction and the orientation the other direction separately if I choose to. So this is great because they're little checkerboards, they're a foot, we can do the math in our heads. But if we go back over to this brick pattern, whoops, don't want to do that. So, and I'm going to go ahead and select this. So I know that in real life, 4 of these bricks make up a foot. But if I look at the scale up there and try to figure out how to then change the orientation without doing some multiplication and some division, which as a designer I'm not really too happy to do, there's another way that I can use my tape measure tool to scale things appropriately. So I'm going to go over and pick my tape measure, or it's T for tape measure. I'm going to pull up a foot. Then I'm going to go back to my texture position tools. And I'm going to move. So I want, if I scroll in, I want this thumbtack to be at the bottom of one of the courses. And it's nicely put there by whoever made this texture to start with. So I'm going to go ahead and move that texture over to this corner. And then I want to move this thumbtack 4 courses up. And actually, if you look at it, it tells you if you drag it, it's going to scale it. But I can also, it says click to lift pin. So if I just click on it, I can move it over here, 1, 2, 3, 4 courses up, click there, and then I can take that thumbtack and drag it up to the foot marker that I made before. Make sure I keep it straight, and go ahead and right click and say done. And now 4 of my bricks is the height of a foot. So that's another way to scale things if it doesn't really work out to use the scale measurement. All right, normally I'd say questions, but we don't have time. So let's move on. So that's changing the orientation and the scale of textures that come with it. So I'm going to, you can also change the underlying color. So I'm going to go and we're just going to pick some carpet. And I'm going to paint this on. And just to show you, if I go and desaturate this, every single material is just a gray, black and white image. So you can take that black and white grayscale image and add any color that you want to it and change the whole look of what that material is. So before I do that, I want to make a copy of this before I start messing with the original copy. So to do that in a PC, there's a little plus thing which makes sense to create a material. I'm just going to call this carpet test. I'm going to click OK. And then I want to make sure that that is the carpet that is now. Let's just sample it to make sure. So it's the carpet test. So it's a little more complicated if you are on a Mac. So in a Mac, you can actually change the inherent texture that's in there, which you definitely don't want to do. So you want to definitely make sure that if you're using a Mac, you make a copy of it first. So you need to paint it on. It's got to be in your model, so it's yours and not SketchUp's anymore. And then if you click the little house icon, you're going to go to Colors and Model. And then in that, if you right-click on the material that you want to copy and click Duplicate, then you'll get a second copy of it. And then if you go down to the Color, Edit, you will then be able to edit it. And mainly using the sliders at the top, which we're going to do with the carpet in the PC model, is how you can then change the color within that. So let's go back to SketchUp. So I've got my carpet test selected. Then I can go to the Edit tab. And I'm going to go back to what it was originally. So a lot of the SketchUp colors that come are really kind of gaudy colors. So one of the first things you can do is if it just looks like, my kindergarten kid painted this, is just desaturate the color. But more to the point of what we're doing now is if I go to red, green, blue, if you know some color theory, you can start sliding these around and change the color of the carpet. And then you can go back and try hue, lightness, and saturation. So with that, in that one carpet texture that came with it, I can actually make pretty much any carpet in the world if I knew a little bit about color theory. So, and that's true of, again, all these other textures. Remember, they're just look for a pattern that you like and then figure out how to add the color to it to create the color that you want. So if I've created this new one and I want to save it, also I can open up a secondary pane. So I've got my color that's in the model up here. On the bottom, I'm going to go to carpet. And then all I have to do is drag this down, and it will be in my carpet library from now on. All right. Questions? No. We're moving on. And you can always find me later somewhere else or find me tomorrow. But so here's some tile. And let's try to do the same thing with this tile. I'm going to select it because I have a tile similar to this, but it's very blue. So I want to try to make this tile, which is pretty close, and I'm going to try to add some blue to it. And you see when you do that, and this is a gross exaggeration of what I might do to this tile, is that suddenly all these what were very light pink undertones suddenly become like this very purple thing, and this is not usable, or certainly not the tile that I'm going for whatsoever. So there's a really interesting button called the Colorize button, which is right over here. And if you click on that, what happens is all those undertones, which were the complementary color just exaggerating itself, suddenly go away and basically takes the main color of your material and just expands it throughout. So if you start getting some odd color variations, go ahead and try to click Colorize. And then if you have done all this stuff and you're so far off and you don't know where to go, if you click the Reset Color, you'll go back to where you were. So you can't mess up too much. All right. So another really cool texture trick is I'm working on modeling this building with my brick over here. So as you can see, I've just started modeling. I kind of have some details to go to add to my brick to get this building. But another really cool trick is I'm going to go ahead again. I'm going to select this brick. And there is a thing called Match Color on Screen. So it's got, on a PC, it's a little computer with an eyedropper. If you are on a Mac, you are going to have a little magnifying glass kind of up in the left-hand corner. So if I click on that, with my brick texture selected, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit. So what you're looking for is kind of a nice medium example of what the color is. So some part of the brick that's not in bright sunlight, some part of the brick that's not in deep shade. So I'm going to click on this. I'm thinking somewhere right up here might work. And then if you look and see, my brick has now changed to match more closely the brick that was in the photo that I was trying to sample. So that's kind of an exterior example. Let's go over and look at if you're working on an interior and your client has found these chairs, which are pretty typical chairs. And I found this chair in the 3D warehouse that is pretty similar, but not the right color, but I can do the exact same thing again. I just want to make sure first that I select the material in the chair that I want to alter. And then I'm going to go to Edit and Match Color on Screen and find a middle ground red. And that's going to change the chair to pretty closely emulate the chair that I'm trying to match. And then I might select the brown wood and try to make it just a little bit darker using my hue, lightness, and saturation. And maybe desaturate it a little bit to try to match the chair legs also. So, if you're doing interiors, if you're doing exteriors, it's really hard to get an exact match of the material. So, but if you're getting close, the client can get an idea of what the whole space looks like, And then, of course, I always have the real samples with me. And of course, when you're matching colors, then you also have the problem of calibrating the color on your screen. So that's it's a whole another issue. See people raise their eyebrows. So, so it's kind of like, as you know, time is money. How much time can you spend making the exact chair that your client wants? So the idea is how quickly can you use these tools to get a pretty close approximation of something that will give your client an idea of the space that you're going for. So that's stuff that you can do within SketchUp. But sometimes that is not even close. So we're going to look at some outside sources that you can go to get textures and bring them into your SketchUp model. So when you start looking at other sources, it's usually a time versus money thing. So FormFonts is probably the #1 premier source for materials and also for other components. So if I look at the library for images, and let's just go back to SketchUp for just a second and let's look at their tile. And again, here's our little palette that we have. So if I go to Form Fonts, and I'm in Images, is what they might call materials or textures, and search for tile, I have 422 tiles to pick from. So some of them are roof tiles, but if I keep moving on, there's many tiles that are probably a much closer approximation to the tiles that you're actually going to use in your real project. And Form Fonts has exterior building materials. It's not just interior materials. So I mean, you can go on and on and on looking here. So Form Fonts is of everything I'm going to tell you, it's the most expensive. It's $200 a year. And for that $200, you can download 30 textures 30 times a day, and I don't know, there's another 30. There's 30, 30, 30, but I've never overused their thing. And once you download them, so if I click on this, oh, and I gotta log in. Sorry, I was logged in. So if I click download, then I can just save it. And I've got material libraries set up. So in the SketchUp materials, I've got a tile library. I'm going to go ahead and save it there. And then if you go back to your model, to bring it into my model, I'm going to go to File, Import. And find my tile library. These are SketchUp files, JPEG files. And let's just go ahead and I'm going to select this tile. And it's going to come in and you can paint it as any other material. So there's other sources that are free. This one is called CG Textures. And you probably don't need a lot of bones or things in your models. So CG Textures is used by a lot of gamers, people that are doing other kind of architectural visualizations. But there's also some great materials in here. So if I just go to Tile on this site, and let's just look at Zelig. So here, if you look at these images, some of them are set tiled. So that means if you bring them into your model, they'll tile over and over and over, just like a SketchUp material would. Some of them are just huge. So that should just cover your entire floor or cover whatever you're going to be using. So it's not going to tile, obviously, from one side to the other, but it should be big enough that you can use it as it is. So if I click on one of these, so they make their money because I can download a small file for free. But if you're doing something and you're making a movie and you want a bigger file, then you have to pay for it. But just as an FYI, you don't want to use a big file because that's going to make your SketchUp file bigger and bigger and bigger. So unless it's some major thing that's in your face and you're going to be blowing it very big, these small files are great. So if I click on one of those, it's going to do the same thing. It's just going to ask me to download it, and I'm just going to do it as I did in Form Fonts. So again, there's some great textures here. It's kind of hit and miss because it's not specifically for design, but they've got some great wood flooring in here, which is another place that SketchUp is not really great at. So there's also some more places within SketchUp itself. So the 3D warehouse technically doesn't have textures. It has components, but there's textures hidden in the components in the 3D warehouse. So if I go to the 3D warehouse, and I'm going to search for, if I'm connected. Okay, this is when the technical help in the back goes. Okay, here we go. So if you search for something called texture packs, and I'm going to search for, I think it's wood texture packs. So what you're going to find is collections of squares, but these squares have textures on them. So if I download that, I can sample those textures and then bring it into my model. So I'm going to go ahead and go to Texture Pack by Evan Almighty, and I'm going to download that directly into my model. So I'm just going to make a floor here. So then I can just use my paint bucket tool to sample one of the materials off of here and then paint it into my model. So this seems great. That one worked great. I know if I sample this one and paint it into my model, that doesn't tile great. So it's like anything else in the 3D warehouse, because anybody can put stuff in there. There's going to be some great tileable textures, and there's going to be some that are not great tileable textures, but they're free. So, it's like, that's a great thing. Of Form Fonts, you pick something from there, it's done. If you go something here, you might spend half an hour looking for the appropriate texture and how much is that worth and how much can you bill your client and then how much is Form Fonts worth in the end. But this is kind of fun to play around with, and you can find some great stuff here. Some people have put a lot of work. So just search for texture pack and whatever the material is that you might be looking for. You can also, let's look at Google. I'm going to open up a new. So you can go to Google Images, and there's two different words that you're looking for when you're looking for textures that will tile. One of them is tileable, one of them is seamless. And that's like S-E-A-M-L-S, seamless. So I searched on wood flooring tileable texture, and here we kind of have the same issue that you have in the 3D warehouse. Anybody can put stuff in here. So some of these are great. So if you just kind of want to look and make sure that the light is even from one side to the other, so this one's obviously not going to work. Some of them have a really light watermark on, they're not going to work. Some of them, if you look at it and just see, that doesn't look like it's going to tile. Some of them, let's see, if we look down, like for example, this one doesn't have any planks, so it's going to be really long planks when it tiles all the way across. But again, there's hundreds and hundreds of tile textures here. And again, when you're looking at them, you don't need to look for the final color that your wood is. Mainly you're looking for the wood grain, if it's a really heavily grained wood or really light grained wood, because you can always bring it in your SketchUp model and then change the color of the wood. You can even bring in a picture of the sample of the real flooring, sample that, and then you have your material. So that's 4 different sources. Again, it's just time versus money where you want to go. So sometimes another place to look is manufacturers' websites to get materials off of. So I'm going to go to, this is the Zodiac countertop materials. So this is all of their different materials that they have. So I can sample one of these by going to material and right-clicking, and I'm going to say Save Picture As, and that's going to pull just that picture off of this web page, so that material. And I'm going to go and, let's see, put that in my countertops and save it. And then it's the same thing. I can go back to my SketchUp model. And I'm going to show you when I import this one. Let's see if I can find it here. Actually, I'm going to go to my Basecamp files. So here it is. There it was. There. All right. So when I paint this one on, if you look at it really closely, you can kind of see the lines where it tiles together. So tomorrow we're going to talk a little bit about bringing that into Photoshop, or actually what I'm going to use tomorrow is Photoshop Elements. So if you can't afford Photoshop and you don't know about Photoshop Elements, it's the consumer version. It was $89, now that's just $110. And basically 95% of what I do, okay, maybe 85% I can do with Photoshop Elements. So it's a really easy way to create some tileable textures. So this one I could create a texture that doesn't have these little lines in. But more often it's something like a fabric that if you try to tile it, it's very obvious where one fabric piece ends and where the other one starts. So you can go and use the clone and the stamp tool in Photoshop and spend like an hour cloning and covering up all these lines. But again, it's like a money issue because can you bill your client for an hour's work to make a perfect countertop, and it's like probably not. So I've kind of figured out a really quick way to make a cheater tileable texture, and we're going to talk about that tomorrow. So another place, or another thing that might happen when you go to a manufacturer's website. So I'm going to go, got a paint color, and I want to put that particular paint into my model. So I'm going to go to Benjamin Moore, and somewhere on all their, whoever's paint things you go to, you're going to find all their colors. And some manufacturers even have downloadable samples that you can actually download into the SketchUp warehouse. Like I think Benjamin Moore, now you can actually download their colors. So when you go to your colors, all the Benjamin Moore colors will be colors to pick instead of the SketchUp colors. But if I try to right-click on this, I don't have that option to save image as. So, but I can still save, because basically I'm saving these color pixels. So if you have the snipping tool, so if you're on Windows, you can go to, go to All Programs, Accessories, and Snipping Tool, and just download this little scissors guy. So if I click on that, and I'm going to say New, it's just going to let me pick somewhere. I'm basically picking those pixels, and then I can go ahead and save that. And if you are on a Mac, you don't have that option. But if you do Command-Shift-4, that is the same thing. It does a little snip of whatever's on your screen. So now I have this color. I can go back to my SketchUp model, and I can import. I thought I had the blue. Actually, I don't think I actually saved it, but it's the same thing. I'll go File, Import, and that blue will just fill up your whole screen. And again, it's like colors, paint colors are probably the worst for what they look like on the screen versus what the paint sample looks like. But when you do it this method that you have the exact, whatever you computer geeks call the computational numbers that went in the computer that Benjamin Moore said this matches exactly. So you can go ahead and paint that on. All right, so what it took me a while to figure out. So now you're downloading all this stuff, and as you go on, you can see that I've started to create all these different, and this is what you're going to want to do, all these different material files. So I'm just going to go start down somewhere in it. And let's just go to the details. So I've got all these different kinds of materials that I use a lot as interiors. And once you start realizing that all the different places you can mine materials from, it really helps to start making your own directory in your file system of all these different materials so that you can use them over and over again. Because you're going to find like a good wood flooring that you're going to use over and over. You know, if you're a builder, you might have, you know, hardy plank pattern or something that you're going to use over and over and over. So I showed you earlier about saving the materials, dragging one from a palette into another, into the library that is already there. So when you do that, when you're working with the paint bucket tools, those are SKM files, and they live within SketchUp. But if you see, when you start going everyone else, those are JPEGs. So it's two different kinds of file formats. And you can start dragging within SketchUp and making little libraries, but pretty soon those are going to get really big, and they're going to get cumbersome. And you can't bring new materials into them without importing and saving. So really, you kind of need to pick a way to go. It doesn't make sense to have half your library in SketchUp models and half your library over here in this whole file system that you've made. So the other thing about when they live in your computer is that they live in that instance of SketchUp in that computer. So I have all my materials in my directories in Dropbox. So that means that whether I'm at my office, out of my client's house, I'm here, I have access to all those materials. And it also means if you're working in an office with other people, if somebody adds a material, a flooring, that means everybody in your office can access that flooring. And everybody, even if when I'm at home, if I've got 3 different computers, I could save, make a collection within SketchUp, but that still only lives in that computer. I can export it and import it in the other one, but then when I make a new material, I got to remember to add the thing and export it and import it again. So if you're really working on using materials and textures a lot, I have found that it makes much more sense to have my materials stored in a directory outside of SketchUp. And I might, you know, I've got the flooring that's great, and I might drag that in, the few that you use over and over again. I might save those within SketchUp. The other thing that, and maybe this is because I'm over 30, but when I look at these, so let's just go to the wood. So to me, they're tiny, and I can hover over them, and it tells me what the name of that wood is. But if I have my wood instead in my own directory system, so I'm just going to go backwards to get there. So I can have these be extra large icons. I can have the name of the wood right there with them. And for me, it's just a lot easier to quickly look at and evaluate materials this way than to look at those tiny little squares in the SketchUp boxes. So take that as you will, do with it as you may, but you know, just realize that there's a difference, and realize that you don't want to have your textures in 2 camps. You want to make your strategy and then kind of go with that. So a couple other things that happened. I'm going to do a quick time check. We're moving along. I have 10 minutes. We can take a breath. I'm going to make it. That's great. So we're also going to talk about projected textures a little bit. So you know when you try to paint a texture on a curved surface, weird things start happening. Or if you try to paint a sign on a surface, weird things start happening. So I've got this material. And I wanted to paint it onto these curtains. So I'm going to go ahead and double click till I get down to the texture layer. I'm going to sample this texture. And I just want to make sure that I've, okay. I'm going to, you need to just keep double clicking until the material itself is highlighted, and then you're down to that texture layer. So if I sample this material, I'm going to hold down Shift so I paint everything at once, and then close the component. If you get really close, you can see where there's these weird lines where one panel starts and another panel ends. And basically, if I look at the hidden geometry, it's like wherever there's a different plane, SketchUp just thinks it's something different and adds something there. And this material's so crazy, you might not even notice. But so how you fix that is, first of all, you want to make sure that you have the material sample in the same orientation as your curtains are. So the curtains are there, curtains are here. I want to make sure that the material sample is here. If I was doing the carpet, I'd want to make sure that the material sample was on the floor. So the trick is, I'm going to click on the material, I'm going to right-click, go to Texture, and you want to click this little button down here called Projected. So now if I go back to my curtain samples, and I sample this, and hold down Shift and paint it on and close the component. Now when I turn on my hidden geometry again and zoom in, I can see that that color goes over those individual patterns. So it's going to lay out and look like it's not all disjointed. So that happens a lot if you're trying to paint on furniture, because there's all the curves on the furniture. And if you have a straight material, you get all these weird jaggedy things all over. So this way you can make sure that the material looks like it would in real life. So if I right-click on Texture, it's Projected. So in something else that might happen sometimes, and it took me like way too long to figure this out. So if I have a rectangle on the floor, and this goes back to what I said before, if I sample this material and paint it on the floor, and you're like, what? You're like, what is going on? And you paint it and re-import it, and you're like, what is with that? So it's like if you go back and sample this and right-click and go to Texture, you can see that it's projected. So someone else you might import a piece of furniture or something else, and the texture is projected, and then you try to sample that and move it somewhere else. Like this happens with kitchen cabinets sometimes. And you're like, what is going on? So if I just unclick Projected, that fixes that. And it happens when one is in one plane, the other one is in the other plane. So if you start getting these weird striations, that's where you need to go first. So the one other tool that is really helpful when you start working with materials. So here's a kitchen. And it's this lovely linen white right now. And your client, and of course the kitchen goes all the way over here, and your client says, I really want to see what these cabinets look like if they're brown. So you know that if you want to edit the texture of something, I have to double click and double click and double click until I finally get down to the very final layer. And then I could sample my material over here and paint it on. And then I close that. And then I have to double click this one, and then I could sample this and paint it on. Because these colors, these textures are insides of groups, inside of components. So each of them you have to get to the edit layer before you can change them. So I actually sat and did this on a demonstration video, and then I cut it out because it took like 6 minutes to go ahead and click and click and click and click and click and down to everything. So there is a great, you're talking about the extension warehouse, there is a wonderful, wonderful tool in there called Material Replacer, which is in the extension warehouse. And this is probably the plugin that I use the most working with materials. So using Material Replacer, I'm just going to go ahead and close this first. It says I can replace maple canvas with Babinga, which is the name of this wood, and it's going to change everything. So there you go. I just saved you. So if you go to the great new extension warehouse, where we're not going. Anyway, I will send it to you. And on my website, there's actually a demo about how, if you've never actually downloaded a plugin from the Extension Warehouse, how easy it is to do now. I used to have an old one about how to download, and that was like a 30-minute demo, and now it's a 30-second demo, which is great. So this is a very, very useful tool whenever you're working with anything that's, and once you start working a complex model, pretty much everything is hidden within groups and components. So I did it, and I have 2 minutes to spare. So like I said, I'm going to do a workshop tomorrow afternoon where I'll do all this stuff slower. So, and you guys can have your computers and work along. And I know that it's also all recorded, so you can also get it. So like I said, on your seats, there's refining your interiors. And if any of this stuff was like, I never heard about that before, I really want to know how to do that, if you put a little check mark by it, and then whatever people seem the most interested in is what we will look at tomorrow. I'm also doing another workshop tomorrow morning about editing components, which is the same thing. It's like you can't spend an hour building a couch for a client. So how can you quickly find something in the 3D warehouse and quickly change it to kind of emulate something you have? And we'll also be looking at windows, and it's not just interior stuff. So somebody else is going to be here in 10 minutes. I'm happy to answer questions anywhere else but in this room because I have to leave. And thank you all. I hope you learned something. And I'll see you with a beer in my hand tonight. Thanks.